John Connolly, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. It's great to see you today. How are you feeling?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Excellent.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Now, we're here to celebrate, the 10th anniversary of the Book of Lost Things, which I've got a copy of this in my hands now, and it is truly a thing of beauty. It's a very difficult thing to get gold foil on books these days. As somebody who works in publishing, they must really, really love you to put the gold foil on there.
Cleaning chimneys for a very long time. Tim Healy Hutchinson's chimneys are going to be the cleanest mansion chimneys around.
Now, it's very unusual for a book to get a 10th anniversary edition. What is it about this book, above all others, that has endured? Why do you think people are still reading it now?
That's a very good question. I think, it was a book that when it came out, got a lot of support from librarians and booksellers, and wasn't maybe what I was expected to write, because I was primarily known as a mystery writer. And I think very early on you get put in a little box, and the longer you stay in that box, the harder it is to break out and do something different. So very early on, I knew that I wanted to do other things. But when this book came out, I remember fantasy, although I don't think it's a fantasy novel, the worst reviews it got were from fantasy writers who I think felt that this was somebody moving off his patch into theirs. They were quite protective of their garden. They didn't want no crime writer coming in and standing on the rose bushes. And it's it's a book that has found a readership by word of mouth. It gets recommended by readers to other readers, which is quite a lovely thing, because it's a book about books and how books are not fixed objects, that we bring our life experiences to bear on whatever we read, and no two readers read a book in quite the same way. And also it's about how, I guess, books are, they're kind of an infection. To read a book that you love changes you. We have been altered by books, and you're never quite the same person again. And so there needs to be for a reader, you need to be unselfish and open to get the real joy out of fiction, to endure. And it's a book about grief and loss and fairy tales, particularly fairy tales. And there's something very atavistic and elemental about fairy tales. They, even as adults, they latch into something because they deal with they deal with things that we're all going to go through: grief and loss, and the struggle from the world of childhood into the adult world. And that's a struggle that for adults keeps on going. When you're a kid, you think that you got to get a book of rules at 18 which explains everything, and then it's okay. And and actually what happens is that you keep struggling as an adult. You keep encountering new problems and difficulties. It's very interesting. When I was younger, I remember I would read Stephen King. He was the first kind of author that I read book after book after book by as a teenager. As a young, I'm preteen as well, because that's how old he is. And then I remember kind of falling out of love with him when I entered my 20s. I read, I think, It is the moment when I fall out of love with Stephen King, and it's not him, it's me.
Right.
And then later I came back to him, and the themes that he was dealing with in his books of illness, mortality and pain, adult pain, were very different from the themes that he was dealing with in his earlier fiction, which were very often about teenagers and teenage life. And so it's interesting to take that kind of journey with a writer, and to realize that that you can reconnect with the writer down the line, I think. And so I suppose the Book of Lost Things deals with some of those themes that are universal. The awful thing about good and bad thing about life, I suppose, is that we will all go through the same things. We will, if we're lucky, we will fall in love. We will fall out of love. We will all experience mortality and grief. We will all, in the inevitable cycle of things, we will probably lose parents. And yet nobody is ever going to fall in love quite the way that you fall in love. And nobody is ever going to experience loss or, the joy of having a child. And being a parent the way that you will, because nobody like you has ever existed before. And I always think that the purpose of fiction, or one of the purposes of fiction, is to find the universal in the specific, to take those things that are actually individually felt and yet make them understandable, because and to have that moment of contact, I think, between a writer and a reader, because people don't want sympathy. Sympathy is a very easy thing, emotion, or a very easy response. We say, I'm sorry, if you've experienced bereavement, our natural instinct to say, God, I'm sorry. People actually don't want sympathy. People want empathy. People want to be understood. And I think there are those lovely moments that we as readers of fiction have, where you will pick up a book and you will encounter a phrase or a situation or a reflection by the writer, and you will think, I have always felt that way. I might never have expressed it in those terms, but never has struck me to look at it from that angle. But I know that thing to be true. And when that happens, it's a really extraordinary moment of contact between two individuals who may be separated by time, by gender, by religion, but a moment of commonality where you think, actually, you're not alone in this, and maybe there is a kind of consolation in knowing that.
How do you know when your book is actually ready to leave home?
Well, somebody even said books are never finished; they're just abandoned. It's a bit like throwing your child on the street and going, "There you go. There's ninepence. Go and get a job." It's for me. I come from a journalist background. I'm very practical. I'm not very keen on wandering lonely as a cloud floating on higher vales and hills looking for the muse. I sit down and I work every day. So I set myself a deadline. And I've never not met my deadline, and I've just delivered my 27th book. Because all writers need a focus. Because you can keep changing things. A book I suppose it can always be improved, although it can be improved into a kind of sterility at some point. It can be overworked. And I suppose it's the point that when you're going through it and you're agonizing over commas and you're making the kind of changes to it that maybe a gnat might be able to spot if it could learn to read. There's a kind of point, at that stage it's kind of pointless. But to some degree you learn by finishing things. And you learn by making mistakes. And you can start getting afraid of making mistakes. But actually we learn very little from success. Apart from the fact that you can choose to simply repeat it over and over again until you drive it into the ground. Your learning experiences are all from failing. And every book is a failure. Because what will happen is you will make a set of mistakes in a book. You will think to yourself, well, okay, I don't want to make those mistakes again. So you will start a new book and you won't make those mistakes. You'll make a completely different set of mistakes. And that is the nature of human endeavor. All human endeavor is flawed. And so for me, it's very important to finish things. It is very, I don't give writers workshops because I don't know anything about writing. I know how I write books, which isn't much use to somebody else, but there you go. But the two things I do tell people at this is that every book I've written, I've wanted to abandon after 20,000 words. Every single one of them. And I understand that it's a natural part of the process because we begin all new endeavors with a sense of confidence and enthusiasm. And it's a bit like a marriage, actually. You enter a marriage with the best hopes in the world, or a new relationship. You think it's fantastic. Look at this woman. She is wonderful. I'm never going to tire of her. We shall gamble through the tulips for the rest of our lives. Enthusiasm only gets you so far. And then you settle into the hard grind of actually living with somebody, and the ups and downs that come with it. And a book is a bit like that. You embark on a new project with thinking this is going to be wonderful. And it's the idea that you have, and it's the fresh idea, and you've embarked upon it. And about 20,000 words in, that enthusiasm begins to leach away. And what you're left with is the prospect of, and in some of my books have been too long. One of them is 170,000 words, which is far too long. But you then are left with the prospect of writing another 150,000 words on what? And what happens then for a lot of people is that you hear the siren call of the new idea, and this little voice in your head that says, that idea wasn't very good. Again, to use the analogy of marriage, that she let you down a bit, and the dolly bird in the bar, and I'll never let you down if you come with me. And, and suddenly you follow the dolly bird in the bar, and that doesn't work either, because, that's why she's a dolly bird in the bar, essentially. But so what happens is if you haven't had the experience, I think, of writing and finishing something, what you think is, okay, well, that idea wasn't good. This new idea sounds great. So I'll put this one away as a kind of Frankenstein's monster experiment that didn't quite work out, unfinished, and I'll stick it in a drawer and I'll do the other thing. And so 20,000 words into the new thing, and you begin to set a pattern, which is that you leave things unfinished. And when you begin any form of creative life, in fact, when you begin pretty much anything, frankly, but it's a good analogy for creativity. You're given a finite amount of confidence. And every time you abandon something, you chip a little piece of that confidence away until finally you have nothing left at all. And you will never write your book or your short story or your poem or do your painting. So you finish everything. And that's why I think it's very important for writers to set themselves a deadline. And I know that can be hard because, like everybody, when I started writing, I had another job.
Yeah.
And so you're writing in the evenings or you're writing at weekends. And in theory, there are people who take decades to write their books because of this. And writing needs to become part of your routine. It needs to become something that you do, if not every day, then most days. And whether you get up half an hour earlier and you write 100 words a day or 200 words a day, it has to be something you do regularly. You can't think I'm going to take 3 weeks off during the summer and write my great Russian novel.
No.
You're going to do one day of working on your great Russian novel and, the next 3 weeks drinking gin and watching children's television in your vest. That's what will happen. So it needs to be, we're very distrustful of talk. It depends on who. If you had Martin Amis or John Banville in here, they would be very distrustful of the use of the word craft. They dislike it intensely. Everything is art. You don't get to say what's art, John and Martin. Okay, time will decide that, and other people. But art comes out of craft. It comes out of the discipline of sitting down day after day and doing it when you don't feel like doing it, and doing it when you're thinking that what you're writing or what you're painting or what you're composing is rubbish. Leonardo da Vinci's workshop was probably littered with circles that didn't quite work. Helicopters that weren't going to fly. You have to embrace the practicality of it. And if you do that, and if you go into your desk every day, and if you do a little bit, you will produce work. And you will have something in the end that you can improve upon. But a thing abandoned has no place in the world.
You have unwittingly stepped straight into the theme of this week's podcast, which is getting stuck.
You think I did that unwittingly? I know what you want. What am I, an idiot? Of course, good grief.
Because
you're not interested in me and my book at all. This is just because a ploy.
We've started an outline synopsis, got great characters, as you say, gambling through the fields, and then suddenly the fields have turned to quicksand, and it's harder, and it's a slog. But you're saying, just keep going, keep going.
It sometimes seems like everybody is writing a book. And actually, it's not hard to write a book. It's hard to write well. Right. But pretty much most people can string enough words together to get 90,000 of them and in theory put a cover on it. Well, we've had an explosion in self-publishing. You can do it.
Yeah.
Writing well, that's much harder to do.
Yeah.
And actually, the ease of publishing is the enemy of good writing, because it is now too easy to publish. A book benefits from being put away for a little while. A book benefits from being reworked. At the moment, what you can do is you can write your first draft of your book, have a quick flick through it, put it through spell check, and think, I'll stick that up there. I'll stick it on for 99 cents, or I'll stick it on for free and let people read it. It's not ready to be read. In the past, you would have had to struggle a little bit with it. You would have had to maybe think about saving up some money to go to, if you were that desperate to save up and go to a printer to get your memoirs of Life in the Raj done, because actually most self-published books were memoirs. They weren't fiction at all. Because most people's story that they have to tell is their own story. And very few of them are actually very good at fictionalizing it to a degree. But it would have taken time, and you would have had to eventually go and look at proofs, because they would have paid the guy and he would have produced them for you. You would have gone through it with a pencil. We don't really do that anymore. It's too easy. And also we've got very used as a generation. Well, actually, the generation, because I'm old now, but I'm guilty of it to some degree. We like an instantaneous response.
Yeah.
We're used to Twitter, we're used to Instagram, by its very name, Instagram. You don't want to wait for a day for somebody to get back to you. If I don't reply instantly to an email message from someone, I get an irate follow-up. Mm. In the good old days, somebody would have had to post a letter back to you. So it's the same with writing. That there are people who want to stick it on the internet because immediately you'll get 20 comments on it. None of that is good for you as a writer. That's a disaster. The terrible thing about it, and there's some good books have come out of self-publishing, but actually as a proportion, not many more. It's actually just harder to find them, and it's a lot of trash.
So writing well, John. So writing well is obviously this real key to the success of what you do. So how do you write well when
it is for me? But it's clearly you can write badly and publish a book and make a lot of money. There's no. If you're looking for a formula, that there isn't a formula, and none of it makes any sense. And each year, 1 or 2 books will sell enormous numbers of quantities, completely unexpectedly for the writer and the publisher. It's the finger of God, as a bookseller friend of mine says. Every couple of years, every year points at 1 or 2 people, and for various reasons. But writing well Writing well comes out of reading well. Oscar Wilde said, writers should read more than they will ever write. And that's why the first thing, when people say to me, I'm writing something, so I'm not reading anybody at the moment in case I'm influenced, you more or less throw them out of the elevator. They just go straight out. But you don't even wait for the elevator, just drop them off under the floors. First thing you do is read, because we learn to write by osmosis. You can buy as many Writing for Dummies books as you want, and it's really not going to help you be a good writer. What you do is you read. And actually, you can read. Reading bad stuff isn't a bad way either, because with luck, you'll spot what's awful about it. But that comes from reading the good stuff alongside it. So you read, and then you practice. And most people who write for a living have always written. In the same way that most people who paint for a living, and not to a guy who puts 2 coats on your bathroom, but, the painters or composers have always done it because it was their natural response to the world. They looked around, the people who listened to music and wanted to play on a piano or hum. The guy who, the moment somebody handed him a piece of paper and crayons, began drawing the landscape. And writing is very, very similar. Writing is a kind of natural response to the world. And I think there are very few people who come to it very late in life and succeed. So it just doesn't really happen.
So if you'd say, John, for people that are writing well up to 20,000 words and then just can't push beyond that barrier, what would you say are some of the secrets in your working practice that help you?
The first thing is you have to do a little bit every day. The idea that if you've reached that stage, there is no such thing as writer's block. Writer's block is like cancer. It's many different things. So the first thing is that if you've reached that point, and what you have to say about that, when I say that somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 words, I think is where most people abandon novels. And if we're just going to stick specifically to novels, because they're obviously the long form and slightly more difficult, what happens is that because they've had a good run at it until that point, you'll find that they did those first 20,000 words relatively quickly, because of that thing of enthusiasm. That's when routine kicks in. And what you then say is, okay, you're maybe not going to get 1,000 words a day done anymore, but you have to keep writing. The trick about writer's block, whatever it may be, is that you write your way out of writer's block. So there are 2 things you can do. The first thing is that you slow down and you say to yourself, okay, instead of, if you're lucky enough to be getting 1,000 words a day done, I'm a full-time writer, and that's what I will aim for. So you say, okay, I'm going to get 100 words a day done. And when I get those 100 words a day done, I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm going to put away my notebook on my computer. I'm going to play with the kids. I'm going to take the dog for a walk. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. And the next day I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do another 100 words. And I'm not going to feel guilty. That's one way out of it. The second way out of it is to write something completely different from what you're writing. So if you're struggling with a novel, blogs are very good, actually, to go and sit down and write a blog post about something that you like. I spent part of last year writing essays on music, just to give myself a break because I was juggling 2 novels and I was getting tired. And I thought it was very important that I not get tired. And so I went off and did something else. Writing, what we're talking about is something very similar to muscles and going to the gym. If you go to the gym every day and all you do is exercise your arms, you're going to have, apart from very tired arms, you're going to have kind of little spindly legs that kind of waste away. What you do is you balance it out, and one day you do your arms and you do your legs and you alternate them, and that way you keep improving and you don't get tired. And so, yeah, if you're struggling, that's what you need to do. There's no point saying, look, I'm not going to write anything for 6 months, because then you'll never write again. If I take a week off, I used to take time off when I did publicity and not write. And I would find that pretty much I needed a day to get back into writing for every day I had taken off. So if I took 3 weeks off to do publicity, I was looking at another 3 weeks when I came home just to get back into the rhythm of writing. It's a discipline and a craft. And disciplines and craft, if you don't use them, begin to atrophy very, very fast. So for me, those are the 2 ways to do it. But the thing is, you have to keep writing.
Brilliant.
That's, for me, is the only way to go.
Fantastic. And one of the other things we're really fascinated, John, with what you do in your series with Charlie Parker and the thrillers that you write, is how you build around this one character. Has that always been something that you've been focused on in terms of the character first, plot second? Is there a way that developed for you as the series?
By and large, we read for character. To take mystery fiction, the plots don't change a lot. A guy, a girl dies, the detective comes in, there's an investigation, it's solved at the end, we all move on. You can talk to people, even people who are rabid mystery readers and fans, would probably be hard-pressed to tell you the plot of a mystery novel that they read a week or a month ago. But they will tell you it was a Kay Scarpetta book, it was a Jack Reacher book. And when they go into a bookstore, they will, if a writer departs from the character, they won't buy as many copies of the book. The readers won't go in and buy them. Readers want the character. And they will... Their engagement with the series, the level of affection they have for it, is completely tied up with the level of affection and engagement they have with the character. They're reading for human being. They're reading for humanity. They're not reading for the plot. It helps if the plot is good, but if your characters aren't good, then the plot isn't going to save you. And so I've always, right from the beginning, every dead thing began with character. It began with a man in a car going to visit the grave of his wife. That's what it began with. What the book was about after that, I didn't know, but I knew that was the beginning. And so character is hugely important. Why would you read a book with cardboard characters? I having said that, I answered my question earlier. You read it because sometimes there's a pleasure in reading something that's pretty undemanding, but you don't want to read that all the time. If your kid wants to eat pizza, God bless him, I like pizza, but occasionally force a strawberry into his mouth, it's not going to kill him. So it's character. And especially for a series, readers' engagement with it will come out of character.
And how much did you develop Charlie Parker as a character before you actually started writing, or was it that you learned about his character?
I don't believe in that at all. I don't believe in it. That's the kind of thing where they tell you in writing class to take out a piece of paper and describe his hair and his suit and his blue eyes.
He didn't look like Harrison Ford then.
No, he didn't. He didn't. No, he didn't. Listen, the real truth is, if you asked writers what their characters look like, they'll tell you, he looks like me, except maybe 2 stone lighter and 6 inches taller. And universally, that's what they look like. So let's not put it on. You just stick a photo of the author and say, he's a bit like this bloke, except better looking. So what was the question? Where were we? Are we still here? Are we on?
I was just wondering how much does the characters you create surprise you?
Well, no, they don't. Well, I think, like I know you're saying earlier, I very occasionally when I did usually for charity, I used to advise people, and really, if people were really struggling, or if they were kids trying to write a book, I would say to them, well, yeah, let's do a sheet of paper that says, describe your character. But if that's the level that you have to get down to, you've really hit a problem. As a writer, if you're but then I say that, and I say, like I said to you earlier, I only know how I can write.
Yeah.
There are writers who, I know one mystery writer who can't start a book until he has the title. I know people who will write tens of thousands of words as an outline before they start a book, and will very much swear to the importance of sitting down and saying, well, this character has this background in university, is this tall, has blue eyes. All that matters in the end ultimately is that if at the end of whatever process you have, you produce a book or a short story or a poem or a play that's completed, then that is the way that you write. But you do so through a process of trial and error. And I think if you start with character, then quite naturally a progression occurs, I think. Or certainly that's been the case for me, in part because with Parker, who's the central character of my mystery novels, I've let him grow old as I grow old. So the concerns that he has, the nature of his own physicality has altered. His emotional life has changed. Ultimately, we all draw on our own experiences to create the characters. And I've often described writing fiction as a bit like dreaming. They say in your dreams, you're everybody in your dreams, even if you're dreaming about your father and your mother. You're putting aspects of yourself into them. Yeah. And you do the same thing with fiction. You put a little bit of yourself into every character that you write. I've given every sin I've committed to somebody in a book. Every fault or failing I've had, I've put into somebody else. And it gives them a kind of humanity. I'm not interested in creating monsters. I want them to be understandable. And so that's, I guess, how I give life to characters, is that I think, well, I know this to be true because I've experienced it either directly or through somebody around me. I know that for readers, when they read this in the character, even if they haven't gone through these things, I hope that they will sense a certain truth to it. But, what you're... At the risk of, I'm not going to put a torpedo into this because I think it's a very interesting thing that you're doing. There isn't a formula. There is never going to be. Well, it's why I'm so distrustful of writing workshops that try to break things down in that way. You can help people with the process. That's all you can do. You can help them over those moments where they're going to lose confidence. You can say, yes, this is part of the process. This is what happens, and you should understand it. And these are the ways that you can tackle it. But every writer will find his or her own way through the thicket. And ultimately, the only way to do that is to write and to discover the kind of writer that you are. But we're all in such a hurry to be published, and we're all in such a hurry to make our millions and buy our yacht and our house in the country and wear sailing pants that we're not actually prepared to give ourselves the time. And it's why I said what I said earlier. I think is really important. That I learned writing because from a very early age I wrote. When I was in school and I didn't have to do an essay, I wrote an essay anyway. When I was asked to write an essay, that was great. That was fantastic. I loved it. It was so I've been practicing writing for a very, very long time. I think I would find it very difficult, and this is not to discourage people who want to write, but I'm telling you that it will be commensurately difficult if I'm now 48. If I were to sit down at the age of 48 and think, well, I'm going to be a writer now, that would be very, very hard. Unfortunately, for all the ideas that we have about we want to be flexible and we're open to change in our lives, and we should be, as you get older, you do begin to concretize a little bit. You do begin to set, and it gets harder to shake up the things in our lives. So it's not to dissuade people. What I'm saying to people who, if you're if you're an adult and want to sit down to write, you're going to have to give yourself a crash course. You're going to have to read a hell of a lot, and you're going to have to practice writing, and you're going to have to do all that without any hope of reward. And you don't want to be putting your first short story up on the internet for 99 cents under your self-published imprint. Don't do that. Write, make mistakes, take the time to learn what you want to be. Because ultimately, the question you need to ask yourself is, why do you want to do this? Why? If you want to do it to make money, then you should probably stop now. Because actually, the law of averages says you won't make any money at all. Even people who are published by large publishing houses, publish a novel every couple of years. What was the median income for writers last year? So like £14,000. Yeah. You're going to be driving a bus, okay, or being an accountant, and that will fund your writing life. If you're doing it because this you feel is your way to explore your consciousness and the consciousness of others, and to give yourself an artistic and creative outlet, which is ultimately to improve yourself as a human being, then that's a good reason to write. And therefore, you will sit down and you will make mistakes. And you may join a writing group where you read stuff out and people will critique your work and you'll go back and think about it. And years may go by. And that's the process that you have to set in train now. Which is not to say that, and 90% of the people listening to it probably won't do that. And that's fine. That's great. You can go write your book. And God bless you, because the world is not going to be poorer for having more people writing books in it. You're not starting wars. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But it is worth taking a break and a breath and asking yourself why you want to do this. Because that will determine, A, the kind of writer you want to become, and B, the happiness and joy that you take out of it.
That's fantastic. I think that's a really good place to end. So, John, where can we find you online? JohnConnollyBooks.com. And I'm on Twitter. I like Twitter because you have to be succinct. I feel I sounded very angry during that call, but I'm not. I am not. I really, I'm going to go off next week to talk to. I do a course in a university in Liverpool about creativity. And so all I want to do is encourage people to create and to do things, but I'd like them to do it for the right reason. It has to come from a
and I'd like it to, if it's possible at all, to come from your heart and not your wallet.
Yeah. I mean, what words would you have, John, just to wrap up for somebody who's aspiring to emulate the kind of success that you've had? They have the dream of one day being published. I mean, when you were at that stage in your journey, what kept you going? Did you have the dream of wanting to become published?
never underestimate the power of a chip on your shoulder. I've been told by my father that people like us didn't become writers. We worked for the council. When I worked for the Irish Times, that I was okay. I'd be a good hack in the end. Never underestimate the power of proving people wrong. I'd like to say something more positive than that, but actually contented people never really do anything. Contented people, they're just contented. And as I get older, contentment's lovely. I'm very happy with contentment. In my personal life, contentment's wonderful. In my creative life, contentment is the enemy of all things. So, prove people wrong. Not a bad reason to do something, I don't think. Yeah, prove that you can be a writer.
Brilliant stuff.
John Connolly, thank you so much for joining us
My
today.
pleasure. Thanks very much, folks.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy.
I'm out of breath, Mark. I don't know about you.
Now, here's the first question. Now, do you think in 10 years we'll be coming back to our book and revising it and celebrating it with a special hardback edition? I mean,
I'd love to think that we'd be celebrating it, but I kind of think I'll probably be doing my back in humping boxes of unsold books from the garage into storage when we try and work out what we're going to do with them all. I think that's, I got to say, that must be such an incredible moment for an author. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. When we all sit here and we're all here trying to write our books, and we're hoping, in our wildest dreams, that they might get read by a few people. They may even one day become a bestseller. But what must it feel like for an author to hold in their hand not just the first published copy of their book, but to hold a 10th anniversary edition? Not only does that prove that the book has been massively successful, but it warrants its very own special reprint. That's such an incredible moment in an author's life.
Publishers don't do that often. I promise you. I mean, it's and they don't put gold foil on just any old book, especially in the UK. That stuff is really expensive.
Yeah.
So it is a real sign that a book has had a lasting impact. And I think we can only hope that our book moves people in the same way. So it's I think it's fascinating.
Quick question: do people go in? I heard about this thing about the price of copper going up, and people actually climbing onto church buildings and stealing the copper. Do you think people go into bookshops and they kind of scratch off the gold,
scrape the foil
and collect that?
It's not real gold, Mark. I'm sorry to bring you down to.
Well, that's why I thought it was a special edition. It was 24 carat. So what was the main thing that stood out for you? I mean, there's so much to cover. I think we'd have to do 3 episodes to actually really kind of cover everything he came up with. So many great things that he talked about. And actually, he said about people that go to these seminars and listen to these authors. I think rightly, John would be an incredible instructor, even though he doesn't really believe in that kind of stuff. He came up with so much wisdom, didn't he?
Yeah, the man who says that he doesn't believe in writing workshops would probably write the best workshop in the world. I'd definitely go to his workshop. I mean, I'm not a fan of them either. I think you learn by doing, but I do go to conventions. Things like EasterCon, science fiction conventions, and stuff like that. And just sitting around listening to other writers talk. I mean, there's comfort in knowing that you're not alone, and you always pick up some hints and tips. And John is great. I mean, I'll be adding all his quotes to the Vault of Gold, and I'm just thinking it's going to take me about 3 days to transcribe it all, because there's just so much in there, and it's all amazing. So many great quotes, And I think, he talks about books aren't finished but are released. Don't hold on to books for too long. That makes us afraid from making mistakes. And, we learn little from success. Every book is a failure. You think, I won't make the same mistakes again. But no, you make all kinds of new mistakes. That's a huge lesson to learn for people, not just writers. I think just in life, just when you think you've got something figured out, you'll discover that life shifts to the left a bit. And then you have to discover a whole new way of doing things. I mean, I've written many scripts and plays and books, and I don't think I've ever written something the same way twice. I always end up doing it a little bit differently, and that to me feels like progression.
It is, and I think it's interesting how you frame these things as well, because John kind of said, every book is a failure. In my kind of translation of that, it's that you can flip that over and you can say every book will never be perfect, and it's knowing that it's okay that your book will have flaws in it, whether you discover them now when you're writing it, or maybe, in 10 years when you're reading the anniversary edition, you think, oh, geez, why did I do that? But I do think that it's okay to be imperfect. In fact, one of the things I coach in, and this is interesting because like a book, like a piece of music, it's never finished. There's always something else you can add. And I think this idea of being nearly perfect, striving to be nearly perfect, is a much more healthier philosophy to have as a writer, or anything in life, than trying to be a perfectionist. When people say to me when I'm coaching them, I'm a perfectionist, I always say to them, that is a road to depression. It's a road to feeling unfulfilled, because you'll never be happy with anything you do. So nearly perfect, and having a bit of humility to say, there could always be improvements, but there comes a point where you have to put it out there. So the fact that he said every book is a failure, I feel is kind of a bit of an overwhelming statement. But every book has its failings, sits better with me, and but that's maybe what, if you see that in the way John sees it, he really probably strives hard to learn from the things that he thinks are failures, and that makes him such a better writer. So if that works for him, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think if you're writing and you think, well, I know how to do it now, you're setting yourself up to fail.
That's the minute it all falls apart.
And for me, part of the joy of writing is learning new things each time. The more I write, the more I discover how to write. I discover more about myself. I discover more about humanity in general. That's why I'm compelled to write, because every day I'm learning something new, and I'm improving, and I'm getting better at it, and I can have tea and dunk chocolate biscuits in the tea and not have to go out in the cold. So for me, it's the ideal job. It's perfect. Yeah,
and I think it's important to realize as writers that writing, and this is what I'm discovering through the process as well, which is the most I've ever written really in the period of time we've been doing this podcast, is that, like life, writing is about the journey. And it's wonderful to hit these major milestones where maybe you finish a book, but the minute you start thinking that you're the expert or you know everything is the minute that you close yourself to learning new things. And I think we continue to learn until the day that we die, literally. I mean, it's quite... Well,
that's my hope. I mean, some people don't, and I think that leads to stagnation. I think that's why we're here. You're lucky if you get 60 summers on this planet. You got to make the most of it. Yeah. But here's the thing, Mark. Here's the thing. You're talking about getting stuck. He said every book he's written he's wanted to abandon at 20,000 words. Now, is that a familiar number to you? You remember when we first started on this?
How many words are we at roughly at the moment on our book?
We're probably about 20,000 words. But it also chimes. I mean, he said later on it could be between 20 and 40,000 words. But of course, Robin Stevens a couple of weeks ago was saying that she hits about 30,000 words and wants to give up. So it's at that stage where you're up to your knees in the quagmire, and you feel like, I could just turn around and go back now, or I could keep going. But he says a thing abandoned has no place in the world. That's a wonderful quote.
I love that.
You might think it's terrible, but you only get better by striving to do better.
I think we need to realize this is what I've learned. What I'm learning from all these incredible authors that are giving us, whether it's 20,000 or 30,000, maybe it's related to the percentage of your perceived word count that you're aiming for. If you're going for 100,000, it might happen at 50,000. Maybe there's a point, but maybe there's no hard and fast rule. But what I'm learning about this is that it comes in every single novel, and it's almost like you have to just expect it and go, okay, we're now in this bit of the phase. Get your wellies on. trying to kind of walk through the swamp, and almost not kind of fear it, but just know that it's coming, and in try and embrace it as best you can. But we've had a week and a half, haven't we, trying to we've had a bit of a rewrite in some ways, and
that's it. I mean,
problems.
Without giving too much away. I mean, we've had that honeymoon period where we were racing along. We got a little bit stuck. We kept going. And one of the things I discovered this week, and other writers might relate to this, is I have two characters in the story, and I discovered they're both essentially doing the same thing. And one of them is becoming increasingly redundant. So we had a little conflab, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and make just one character out of these two characters. And it's a slog, and you have to go back and you have to rewrite a lot of stuff. But what that's done is it's streamlined the story. It's made two fairly interesting characters into one very interesting character, and it solved an awful lot of problems. But it took a long time to get there. There was a lot. There was a lot of me just sitting there staring at the screen, thinking, "How do I fix this? How do I fix this? How do I fix this?" And you go, and I tried that Michael Connolly's tip of going back and having a little run up at it, which helped, because it helped put them in the context of where they are in the greater story. And eventually, I found the solution was just to have this one character acting, taking that one role and mixing up aspects of character A and character B and putting them together, and suddenly you've got a really fun contradictory character who's a lot more interesting. So
what was interesting is because you actually wrote in both those characters, and when you added the second character in, the new character, I was kind of thinking, how are we going to develop her? Or him maybe, or was it an it? But how are we going to develop that character? And I was thinking, this could go either way. And then when you emailed me to say, look, I'm thinking of chopping her off and amalgamating her, I was like, oh, that's awesome, because I was actually thinking of writing that to say, not quite sure if this is a bit of a character that's not going to have too much of a life. So it was interesting that we were both feeling that, but you it was great that you just went with it, and I was like, oh, that's awesome, because that's part of the it's problem solving. That's what this phase is.
Exactly,
It's problem solving,
and
it's like being a detective.
It taps into something else John said earlier as well, which is beware the siren call of the new idea. Now, that applied there. He was talking about, I'm going to abandon this project and do another project, but that happens within the novel itself. So I've got a character that's not quite working, and I've had an idea for a new character, and the idea is to go off and flirt with that character for a while. But actually, there were little alarm bells going off in my head saying, are you just going to end up getting stuck in the same quagmire with this character, or should you do something more with them? So, you can become a bit paralyzed. I'm sure, again, people listening to this will probably relate to this, where you hit a bit of a problem and you think, okay, I'm going to have to make a decision here. I'm going to have to go down, route A or route B. Which one do I go for? And I'm afraid that's what writing is about. You have to go down blind alleys. I think we talked about Pixar. I think it was the guys at Pixar were talking about Finding Dory and the blind alleys they go down when writing, Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, and Toy Story as well. If you go back and look at the original ideas for those movies, they were very different to the finished product. Which, if you watch Toy Story, it seems like such an obvious idea, and so well polished. But to get to that, they had to go down all these blind alleys and try all these new things, but without being tempted away by the new things. You have to fold them into your story. Yeah. And it's a really difficult thing to get used to, I think. It's
a bit like having like red herrings in books, and the way that we lead our readers down blind alleys. I think as writers, we have to experience that and try something. And it's okay that it's a cul-de-sac and you go down and you're like, oh, there's no way out, and you have to come back up the road. And we've all done that in the car many times, where we get lost and we've got to back up. So I think, again, it's about embracing that. But I just want to go back to something that you said earlier, Mark, and that John mentioned, because I want to just have a moment with this, because I don't think we can just pass by this idea of the shiny objects, the distractions, beware the siren call of the new idea, as you said, John said. That is me. I mean, that, and honestly, I don't think I'm alone here. In fact, if there's many of you out there, please come and support me in this. Come to our Facebook page and tell me that I'm not alone. But no, I coach a lot of people who exceptionally these people are exceptionally creative individuals, and it can be a blessing and a curse because they constantly come up with new ideas. And the thing is, the reason why I think it hits, I think the reason why it's easy to abandon a novel 3 chapters in or 20,000 words in is because when you hit a brick wall, that's when the real hard work, like you talking about having to stare at that screen and say, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to fix it? It's actually easier to suddenly think of a brand new idea or suddenly have something that feels fresher because it's newer. And that's the thing. It's like that new car smell, right? It's that fresher idea. And it's very easy to jump ship. But actually, I think to be a brilliant writer, and this is what I'm having to learn the hard way, is you have to push through and you have to somehow resist the shiny new object, because it can actually be the thing that means you never finish anything. I mean, we came into this podcast talking about how I'd started 20 books and never finished one. I mean, I probably have, if I put the 20 together, I probably have enough writing for about 6 whole books, but I don't have one book published. So I want my team to come out and we need a form a support group here, because I do think this is actually a very common thing, especially amongst writers who are creative individuals. Do you see that a lot as well, Mark?
Yeah, I do, and I understand it. I mean, my solution, I get that as well. I think everyone gets that. It is the easiest thing to be tempted away from something that's difficult to do something that's easy. That's just human nature. My solution is, I mean, as you know, I have more than one project on the go.
Yeah.
You know, so I've got scripts that I'm working on with John. I've got another book I've got another 2 books that I'm working on. So today, when I got a bit stuck, I put this to one side, and instead of typing on a screen, I picked up a notepad and was just jotting down ideas for a new book. Just jotting down ideas. I wasn't getting too bogged down in it. It was just it was the equivalent of going for a walk or walking the dog or whatever it is you need just to take your mind into another place. And I got some work done there, and that was good. And that's on a scrap of paper that I'm going to fold into a document later today. And then when I came back to this, everything seemed a lot simpler. It didn't seem like such a problem. So now the thing you must never do, if you've got more than one project on the go, don't have them all at the same stage. Don't be outlining everything at the same time. Have a project that you're almost finished on, and then have one where you're in the middle and have one where you're at the start. If you can possibly, I mean, I tweeted something early in the week on my own Twitter account, just saying that, you know, I felt the crunch of gears because I had a script meeting early in the week with John about a project that we've been working on for years, a feature film script. The script is in really, really good shape. We had one last meeting. We put a real polish on it and we've sent it off to the producer. And then I hung up from the Skype call with John, made a cup of tea, come back and sat down to work on our project. And it was like, oh my God, I'm pushing this enormous boulder up a hill. It's just this huge crunch of gears as you go something that's nearly finished to something that is really hard. Yeah. But, you know, it's fun. That's why we do this, you know, so if you're not up for that.
Yeah, that's awesome to actually, you know, thinking about that. I'd never even thought of that, but yeah, different stages of the project. Like I know that Shannon said that she, when she comes up with new ideas whilst writing a book, that's absolutely fine because you need those new ideas, but she kind of marinates them. She puts them in a kind of a sauce and sticks them in the fridge. And then when, like you're saying, if you're coming to the end of a new book, you can then start to develop that idea, which is kind of good to have because you never really want to finish a book and then be twiddling your thumbs thinking, oh, I've got to follow that up now. I've got to do that, you know, that incredibly difficult second book or second album. So I think that idea of knowing which stage you're at with things is actually really, really important because you can get bogged down otherwise if you're just always stuck in the hard bit of the novel, for example. Yeah,
and John said that, you know, his solution is to write something completely different, write a blog, or you might write poetry, you might just want to write some nonfiction. And, you know, he said, you know, to get out of writer's block, you need to write your way out of writer's block, you know, slow down, just do 100 words a day. You know, it's 100 words you didn't have yesterday. I mean, we've said this again and again. We've heard it from every writer who's come on the show. You know, just try and write every single day. No matter how little. I mean, Michael Connolly talked about doing 15 minutes a day. John Connolly, 100 words a day. You know, it's that thing of writing every single day. And if like you said, if you decide, I'm going to write my novel over 3 weeks in the summer, it's just not going to happen because, you know, you're pushing that boulder well, his analogy was you go to the gym, you know, and if you go every day and you exercise different muscles, then you're just going to be a lot fitter, you know. Taking time off makes getting back into that rhythm even harder. And I know exactly what he means, you know, just even taking a week off, I come back to it and you feel the pain when you start pushing that boulder again.
Yeah. It'd be kind of interesting to know how many people who do NaNoWriMo actually do writing outside of the 1 month where they're trying to write 50,000 words, because I think the idea of NaNoWriMo as a practice is it gets you then into the writing habit. But I think some people might think, well, I've done my 50,000 words this year, I'll do it again next year. And I think maybe that might be missing one of the potential huge benefits of getting into that process of writing daily. Goodness me, there's so much we could cover on that. But
to our listeners, if you're out there and you've done NaNoWriMo, has it got you into the habit? I mean, this is the time to ask, isn't it? You know, has it given you a shot in the arm? Are you writing every day and you weren't before? Yeah,
because December time is, you know, following obviously November. It's a very busy month. People have got you know, family, friends, Christmas shopping, all the rest of it, and it's very easy. I think it's probably the busiest month actually. Of the year for most people. So it'd be interesting to see, do people manage to carry that on? I reckon, without doing any kind of research here, I reckon the vast majority don't.
Well, like you say, December's a busy month and it's very easy to find excuses not to write. And also it's dark, it's miserable, well, at least in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. You know, it's quite a depressing time of year, you know.
I find it quite a nice time to write, though, because I don't then have the draw of the sun outside and wanting to be in the garden. I like that kind of hibernation period, but for some people, like you say, they might not be inspired to write, or they might just be burnt out from having...
Well, mind you, having said that, the number of fantasy authors I know who live in the American Midwest where it snows 6 months of the year, you know, writers like Patrick Rothfuss basically lives in a cabin, writes all year round, you know. So it's I
think of Misery, the film Misery, you know. That kind of
I don't know if Patrick lives in a cabin. I just imagine that he does, you know.
It's part of the fantasy, right? But I think one of the other things that we should definitely touch on that John said, which I, again, it kind of really resonated, was this idea that you learn by osmosis. It's another thing I keep picking up from a lot of authors. They say, if you want to become a good writer, read a lot. And he said, we learn to write by osmosis. So, and it always seems a bit of a catch-22, because obviously I'm learning that writing is hugely time-consuming. When you want to, you know, I think I could write a piece of music in an afternoon. I could maybe knock off a track in one afternoon. You can't do that with a book. I mean, there's no shortcuts here. And so I'm curious. You once said, Mark, something about speed reading, and I never actually touched on this before. But have you learned to speed read so that you can read more and yet still have time for writing?
No. If anything, the older I get, the harder it is for me to read.
That's just your glasses, mate. You just need to go.
That's true. Yeah. It's funny. I've got colleagues at work who are in their 20s and they read the way I used to read, which is they might get through 2-3 books a week easily.
It's insane.
I mean, they're not writers, admittedly, but they are, you know, and I was like that. I would devour books. I might have a good run, you know, where I might read a book in a week. I mean, I'm reading Derren Brown's book, Happy, which I thought was going to be this kind of easy-go-lucky self-help book. It's all about Greek philosophy. As soon as I started reading it, I thought, this is going to be hard work. It's a really rewarding book, but you have to walk through it. You can't run.
To be committed.
You know. And again, as soon as I started taking writing seriously, I stopped reading quickly because I started taking notice of sentence structure and the words that people use. And,
you start to analyse rather than just enjoy it.
And just the simple verbs that they use and the, I mean, it's. I tweeted this a couple of weeks ago where I was chatting to an agent at a party a couple of weeks ago, and his wife is an editor, and she was saying, the words seems, it seems, or seemingly, cut them all out. And I thought, oh, really? Okay. And I went back and did it in our document, and immediately it's the better. You know, if it's just little things like that make all the difference. So where a sentence, I don't know, for example, the room seemingly swayed around him. the room swayed around him. It's just immediately more oomph.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's that kind
I've
of...
heard that people do that with some other words where they do a kind of as a part of the process when they finish their book, part of the editing process, they have a find and replace, or they have a find. I can't remember which words it was, who or what or something like that.
Well,
but talking,
a lot of them are adverbs as well.
Yes.
You know, the Lee, you know, and also things like he said, she said. You know, it's again, it's a thing you're taught at school. You know, when you're young, they teach you to use wow words. You know, so you try to put really big words, and I just know that those are the words that are going to get cut by any editor. And you know, when you're doing he says, she says, they feel so pedestrian. You think, well, the temptation is to say he declared, he exclaimed, he ejaculated, which is one they Thomas Hardy used a lot, and always used to make us giggle in A-level English. And whereas if just go with he said, she said, you know, the I goes over it, and the reader will love you forever.
Yeah, I only learned that one recently. You know, I picked that up, and ever since it's been like such a relief to not have to then sit there and think about how I'm going to exclaim this character. But on that point, it's a very good question, because it links in nicely to our question of the week, doesn't it?
Yes, we had a tweet just today from Elena Mickelson, who asked us, "Is autocrit a good investment?" To which my first question was, what is autocrit?
Yeah, I've never heard
I looked. I looked it up. It's a piece of software that basically you input what you've written into it, and it can be the whole book, or it can just be a chapter or whatever you've written that day. And it looks at the words that you're using, and it gives you a score. It looks at your dialogue, your word choice, your pacing, your repetition, the adverbs, the most frequent adverbs you use. It compares you to published fiction, and then gives you kind of feedback on that, on how you're doing as a writer. Now, you know me, Mark. I would run a mile from something like that. And it's $29 a month as well, you know. So it's, I mean, there's no contract. You can only do 1 month if you want to. But this immediately sets my alarm bells reading stuff like this. So I mean, I've not used it. Let's be fair to these guys. This could be the most amazing thing ever. But
yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I found, it's weird that you bring that one up. Again, that question came up because about 2 weeks ago, I am a complete techno geek. I love little apps. I love all the little things that will make my life more productive, more effective, or give me opportunities to procrastinate learning a new tool. But I found something else which came up in a list of the 50 apps or the 50 free apps that I could never do without. It was some technology blog. And I came across something called the Hemingway app. And again, I'd never even heard of this. And I went and had a look at it. Now, it sounds possibly similar, or maybe kind of like a free kind of cut down version of autocrit.
I'm looking at it now. Well, it's free.
It's free. And what it does is it's the same thing. It shows you, it highlights. It's quite interesting. I love color coding, and it actually color codes things to say, this sentence is X many sentences in your chapter are hard to read. And it talks about this phrase could have a simpler alternative. This is an adverb, remove it. And
yes, the same thing.
The same thing. But the thing I really like about this one is it actually has a readability score. And this is something I'm seeing more in technology now. I've seen an email program that actually says, how easy are your emails to read. And this particular...
Oh, you definitely need that, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need a complete translator and a proofreader for my emails. But Hemingway Editor gives you a grading score. So in North America, the school system is, grade 1, grade 2. Is that what it is in England now as well, Mark? Have they changed it? Because it used to be...
yes, they have. Yes.
Okay. So people know what we're talking about when we say grade.
No, I have no idea. My kids come home and just talk numbers now, and I'm like, "Is that good?" Okay. They go, "Yeah." I go, "Great."
So great. So I'm looking at this
Father
example.
Of the year.
I'm looking at this example, and it says, this particular text is its readability level is grade 6, and I think as authors, it's something that we do need to pay attention to, because we're writing for our audience ultimately, and if we want a certain audience to be able to understand and not get too lost in the wordiness that can happen, I think, within some writing, having some kind of grading score, I think is quite a useful indicator. Now, I don't know how scientifically correct this is, but Shannon once said to me that she has to write for what we call a grade 3 level, which is around it's not writing for 8 or 9-year-olds, but it's writing with words that 8 or 9-year-olds could understand. That's not her book audience, but she's found that writing simpler language means that you actually have ultimately a larger audience that can enjoy it, because there's nothing worse, I think, than sitting down with a book that's just too wordy and it's just too heavy going. And maybe it's just trying to be too intellectual with its language. That puts me off in some.
I mean, we've said before, if that's not who you are, then it will just sound pretentious anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot to be said for great writing. I mean, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. I read a book in the summer called The Vorrh, VORRH, by Brian Catling. And I read that on holiday. I'm so glad I read it on holiday, because I was able to give over the whole day to the book, because you couldn't rush it. You know, it demanded your attention, and it was an incredible book, and I'm so glad I read it. But going back to the software, yeah, I mean, if you're starting out, I would go with something like Hemingway. AutoCrit, $30 a month. You know what? I mean, save $30.
Let's see if people have used it. Who's used it out there?
Yeah, let us know if anyone out there's used it. But
maybe
I would
AutoCrit might like to put forward the case as to why people should use it.
I mean, I would say save $30 a month while you're writing your book. By the end of it, you'll be able to afford the services of an editor, a real human being who could do this for you, you know? So there is that. That's one way of thinking on it.
Yeah.
I just prefer human interaction.
It all comes down to that, doesn't it? I think, you know, it's what some people like the technology, some people prefer a bit of both. You know, and I think that's
a case in point this week, because shall we talk about my Scrivener fear?
Oh yes, this was fun.
Well, there is this. You explain the feature. You explain the feature. You explain what you do.
So Scrivener is designed to be very different from, say, writing a long document in Word. It's designed to actually, you write everything in scenes. You write like a little navigation tool on the left, and you create a new note, and they all sit within these folders. And the idea is that it really helps in the editing and revision phase. So you can actually easily move or chop out scenes rather than having to kind of delve into this massive document and find out where that bit is that you want to cut. And it keeps everything kind of segmented. But the difficulty is that there's a certain view that you can click. So imagine you've got a chapter, a bucket with all of these different notes underneath it. If you click on the top level bucket, then you can see the entire chapter. It kind of like amalgamates everything into one beautiful long document, which is how we're used to reading. But Mark didn't realize, and I must admit I didn't explain it properly as well, that you have to click on that chapter and then press a button at the top of the screen to see this view. Mark thought I'd just gone in and completely chopped up our whole book into tiny little chunks.
Like, you know that bit in The Empire Strikes Back when they're on Hoth and Chewie's working on the Falcon and Han says, "What are you doing? I'm trying to get us out of here. You took this to pieces. Yeah. What are you doing?" Yeah. That was me. That was me. I was like, "Oh God, no! Put it back! Put it back! Put it back!"
Yeah,
but
needless to say,
you took me off the ledge.
I think the words you use is, "Needless to say, I hate this." It was brilliant. I thought, oh crap. I just spent like a day just so I could organise. But what was really lovely and I've got to say, the guys at Scrivener have totally thought this through, because there are some people who just want to sit and write and edit within a chapter because they need that flow. And there's people like me that prefer to have it all broken up so I can see where everything is and it can all visually make sense to me and I can move things around. They've actually created the software so both types of minds and both types of people, I'd say, Mark, we're both those kind of extremes in some regard. We can both work on it how we want. So it's designed to work the way you want to work rather than forcing you into a specific box, as it were, and you have to write this way. And I think that's one of the powers of it. But we're still learning so much about what it can do. It is one of those bits of software where the further you delve,
I got to say, now you've set it all up, I love it. I do. I was, oh God, what's he done now? Oh no, it's like someone's coming and kicked my jigsaw all over the floor. But it's I love it. I love the fact that I can ping back and forth on these things and either look at the whole thing or look at the separate bits. It's
particularly useful as well. I think it's useful anyway, just from as a novel grows, it gets more complex and it gets harder to find things more easily. But I also think that in our situation particularly, we're collaborating, we're both going into this document at different times and we're adding bits, changing it. I think it's going to help us. So again, if you're collaborating with an editor with Scrivener, it's a useful thing to have, because they can say, look, this particular scene's redundant, just whip it out. Instead of saying, well, the bit within chapter 3, about 4 pages down, that needs to go. So yeah, we're discovering the power of this tool. And I think we're going to go through some more of these, Mark, to be honest, before we get to the end. But by the time we get to it, we'll be experts in the software, which would be awesome.
I'll try not to fly off the handle so much. But, you know, I don't like change.
It's a new pair of shoes, isn't it? You know that feeling when you put you've had a beautiful pair of shoes that you've worn out and the soles have started to fall off, but you just don't want to give them up. And when you put on a new pair and they're a bit stiff, and I think that's what it's like with anything, especially something that's so core to what we do. I mean, the writing tool is the main thing that a writer uses. So it's a bit like, you know, getting someone to, to throw away their favorite pair of shoes and put something.
Is this your motivational minute? Your shoe analogy?
Well, it could be. Yeah,
I'm enjoying it. If it is.
Well, on that point, actually, let's dive in, because, you know, no matter what time of year you're listening to, you know, we're recording this towards the end of the year, and it's the time of year when we all start to think about where the year went and goals, and start reflecting on what we didn't achieve this year, what we want to achieve next year. Now, as writers, we're very good at writing, but how good are we at actually writing down goals? So this week, for a motivational minute, I want to challenge everyone to stop what you're doing, get yourself out a piece of paper, and I want you to actually imagine you're going to fast forward 12 months, and what will you have achieved with your writing? Because without that vision, without knowing what it is that you want to create, it's actually very hard to create it. It's a bit like getting in a car, going on a journey, but not really knowing what destination you're wanting to head in. And this is your opportunity. It's that time of year when we get to reflect, and we maybe think about what we didn't manage to achieve this year. We may be reflecting on the great things that have happened. But it's very important to write goals down, because they've proven time and time again that when you write goals down, the chances of them actually happening are multiplied tenfold. I mean, there's statistics I can throw out if you want, but the bottom line is if you write them down, there's something about that process of getting them out of your head onto paper. And the thing that I've done throughout my whole life is I've always had a little postcard where I write down my goals for the year. I'd write 10 things I'd love to achieve. And my tip is, don't hold back. Don't be realistic. Be completely unrealistic. Like, what do you want to achieve? What would you love your book to achieve? And write those things down and have that as your list that sits by your workstation, you know, by your computer. Every day that you sit down to write, if you touch base with those goals each time you start to write, it will change, and you will show up to write something at your very highest level rather than just sitting down and kind of bashing out some words. It's like it almost sets a goal. And I've done this for a number of things in my life. I'll tell you, it works from a personal level and from a coaching level. So 10 things. What would be one thing on your list, Mark, for next year? Just to throw you.
God, only one.
Yeah. Well, only just one thing. Well, what would be, give me an example of, you know, what would be, I mean, you talk about this film script that you've done. What would be the most incredible thing that could happen with that?
Well, us finishing this book, that would be incredible.
That'd be a miracle. Right?
Getting this film off the ground, that'd be fun. There's a TV show. Getting my book published or picked up, my fantasy novel that I'm working on. I do have a list of, and on top of everything else, we're probably moving house soon as well, you know, just to mix it up a bit, just to make life a bit more complicated. So, I've got, and you mentioned statistics there as well. Did you know that 28% of statistics are made up on the spot?
I also heard that Oscar Wilde said that the trouble with quotes on the internet is you never know if they're true or not. Right. So, yeah. All I can say.
That was Vic Reeves, the percentage one, by the way.
That's brilliant. It's definitely, if you've ever resisted it, if you've ever resisted doing it and you think it doesn't work, there's only one way of finding out, and that's trying it. And I don't know anyone who's ever regretted doing it, put it in that way. I find it quite scary, actually, how when you write those lists out, as time progresses, you look back at that list and you think, oh my gosh, I've got like one thing left on that list that I haven't done. And yet when I wrote that list, I thought they were the most ridiculously, insanely mad ideas. But I don't know. I think the world moves in mysterious ways to you see the opportunities when you know you're looking for them. That's the big thing. You become aware of that car that you're thinking of buying. Suddenly it's everywhere. on the road when you're thinking of buying it. But before you start, you never had any interest in seeing it whatsoever. I think there's something to do with that awareness factor.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily write lists, but I always let people know what I'm doing. I said to people, I'm writing a movie. And it might fail, but I'm writing a movie.
That is brilliant. Well, think about
because I know a lot of artists who hide their light under a bushel.
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone so they can fail quietly.
Yes.
And I think, if I fail at something, if this fails, we'll go, well, we gave it a go. We gave it our best shot. And we learned something on the way.
I do a course, Mark, called the 3-day challenge, and it's called Ignite Your Dreams. And there's 3 Ds. The first D is define or design your dream. That's what we talked about. The second D is exactly what you just talked about. It's declaring your dream. Because when you declare it, when we declared this podcast, there's no getting out of it now. We've got to do it. And
that's it.
But the other thing is, if you declare your dream to people and people are aware of what it is you're trying to accomplish, they can then help you. We always have this weird sense that we think, if we tell someone our idea, they're going to nick it. No, it doesn't happen.
No.
It's complete rubbish. Let it go. But I think with writers, we become very precious about that. So I'm so pleased to hear that that's what you do, because declaring your dream, I've got so many thousands of examples really of things I've read and things I've seen happen with clients. And when you declare your dream, people show up to support you, and suddenly it becomes much easier. And
that is very, very true. It is very, very true. I've had personal experience of that. And it also puts a fire under you, because you think, well, I better bloody do it now.
Well, I think that's and as writers, we don't have that deadline. Unless we're published by a traditional publisher who's saying you've got to deliver the book on this day or everything's going up, off the plan. We have to create these external deadlines. And as writers, there's no better way of doing that than declaring, even if it's just saying on your Facebook page, right, you're going to have to hold me to this, guys. I'm writing a book and I'm going to get it published by this date. It's why NaNoWriMo works for many people.
Yeah, well, John Connolly himself, he said he sets his own deadlines, and he's written 27 books. So
proof in the pudding.
There's a man who knows what he's doing. And thank you, Elena, for your question today. Elena got in touch via Twitter. So we are at Bestseller XP on Twitter, or drop us a line on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment. We're also on Pinterest and Instagram as well, at Bestseller XP.
Excellent stuff. And do look out for the quotes we put up from our authors. They're very inspiring. We put them out. Please do share them with your friends. You never know how they might land with people and inspire them. We're seeing a lot of people on Twitter sharing them, and it's great to see how it sometimes triggers that little bit of impetus to get going.
They're all on our Pinterest page as well, if you ever want to find them. So
excellent stuff. Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure as always, Mr. Stay. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you, Mr.
DeVoe. It was great. And I am very excited as to. I'd say I'm slightly concerned about the lack of time we now have to finish and start marketing a novel. I won't. I'll just leave it at that. We are going to be writing over Christmas, of course. But that's not a chore. That's actually a joy. So it's going to be lots of fun. But thank you so much for being on this journey with us. And if you are writing a bestseller that you're planning, do let us know about it. Tell us how it's going. Tell us if you're hitting the same roadblocks that we are. And just remember, we're all in this together, folks. We're all in this together.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Until next week, it's goodbye from Mark 1.
And it's goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Bye.
Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life.
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.